Hey, what's up, everybody? Video 44 coming at you with another video. All right, a couple of days after the Jaylen Brown trade, and I've been listening to a lot of commentary because I've been intrigued by it, and I have a few theories about maybe what was going on with the Boston Celtics and why they decided to pull the trigger on that trade. What may have been going on. It was all speculation on my end. I don't know. I don't think anybody that's talking or that I've listened to has an understanding. We're all guessing and just trying to take things at face value and having a hard time putting two and two together when we do so. Of course, Jaylen Brown was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. One of the picks is expected to be the highest favorable first-round pick in 2028 between the Clippers, the Celtics, and the Sixers. So whoever gets the highest pick between the 3 of those teams gets that pick, and the other teams get the lesser picks. But everybody keeps a pick in 28, which I think is interesting because it speaks to what the Philadelphia 76ers ultimately had to give up. They didn't give up the pick. They just gave up the right to keep the highest pick possible in the swap. So it's real tricky. I to be honest with you, I kind of like that in a way. That kind of scenario is intriguing to me. I think that's a top 8 protected, I guess, or something like. I'm not really sure. It's top 8 something, however that works out. But I kind of like that idea to where teams don't necessarily lose picks, but they can change the value of the pick based on the swap. That's an interesting scenario that I like within the collective bargaining agreement. But and the other pick, I think, is like from 31 or something like that, unprotected. Forgive me if I got it wrong. And one of the second-round picks is a swap of some sort, too. So, I think it's a few things that could possibly be going on here. Jaylen Brown, obviously, being somebody who's very polarizing. He's taking a stance on some things that I don't think makes everybody pleased with him. And, I think that probably has a lot to do with not only the trade, but also how he's being perceived in the media to a degree. And furthermore, also, not only that the trade took place, but what they took back for him. So I think that's a tea leaf to read. He might have, as we look at Kyrie Irving and some guys who've taken the pro-Palestinian position, Jaylen Brown has been one of the more vocal people in the NBA, if not the most vocal person, on his stance in that genocide. So when you consider his position on that, and you consider who's at the top of a lot of these ownership groups, and of course our commissioner as well, you start to wonder if he's just not being blackballed in a way. It's too early to phase him all the way out of the league because he's in his prime and he's playing such fantastic basketball. But what you can do is agree amongst all the owners to devalue the kid on the, as it pertains to his basketball value, is a sort of a humiliation process that I think is kind of consistent with what we've seen in this regard. So that's one of my theories, that he's being completely blackballed, but not kicked out of the league because he's just too valuable to do so. So on the court, so what they can do is use advanced analytics, and in the presence of his bad contract, which makes it pretty easy to just say, you know what, this player is not nearly as good as people think he is. He's not as good as you've seen him to be, and ultimately this is why, and this is how we react to it. This is how the market reacts to it. He's not very valuable. It's a very, very sinister and diabolical thing that I'm suggesting could be possible, but I don't think the NBA is above it, unfortunately. Now look at who's at the top of this thing. They're not. And if you follow that Palestinian-Israel situation close enough, it kind of aligns with some of the behaviors that you see there as well. So I always talk about that type of stuff in other subjects, other aspects of my channel. We talk about my opinion all the time on that. Y'all know how I feel. I do not often bring this up on the NBA side of this channel, but I think it's necessary given that I do believe that is something that could be considered why this is happening. Yeah, that is very much a reasonable theory in my opinion. Another theory that I have is a bit less politically based and more so about just the NBA has, over the last, say, since Adam Silver's been the commissioner, has found itself being really, really popular in the offseason. This dates back many, many, many moons, with LeBron James probably being the spearhead for a lot of this, with his decision to move on from the Cleveland Cavaliers initially to the Heat. Think about some of the big trades that have happened every year. There's some type of scenario that is larger than life that keeps people talking about the NBA while it's away. They've done a fantastic job of bringing a lot of attention to the NBA. And what I think they may have found is that one of, as many people see in the internet space, negativity sells. Negativity sells, sorrow sells, negativity just in general tends to sell. Sin sells, etc. And when it comes to this type of thing, what they found is through certain heartbreaking trades in the past, looking at the Luka Doncic trade that just crushed the hearts of the Mavericks, maybe their numbers spiked in a way that made them want to duplicate that energy. Like, yo, that worked out great. Who heart can we break next? How about the Celtics? They got Jaylen Brown, that whole situation. This is perfect. Let's capitalize on that. I think, the exaggerated devaluing of the star player is something that is humiliating for the fan base and ultimately controversial for everybody watching. As a fan of the Lakers, I don't like the Celtics at all, but boy, am I paying attention to everything Celtics right now because I want to see their reaction to the trade and want to see their reaction to just the devastation. I paid attention to all the Dallas stuff when they were really bad. I paid attention to Detroit when they were having their historically low season and it was humiliating. I paid attention to Philadelphia when they were having some of those similar struggles 2 years ago. Negativity draws my attention as a consumer, unfortunately enough, to where I have to wonder if that's something that they're seeing across the board. And psychologically, as Western world American people tend to draw eyes and attention toward those who are doing really bad, whether it be because their team sucks or because some ridiculous trade took place that broke their hearts and humiliated them as it pertains to the value of the player that they lost. This is something that I think holds a lot of weight, or at least maybe one of the functionalities of what they hope to have happen with this trade. I think many things could potentially be going on as it pertains to this trade, not just one goal, but a million different things that could come about from a trade like this. And I think that these two things that we've mentioned could potentially be both functionalities of what they hope would happen with this trade. So yeah, they just, duplicating the pain. It's not just about players moving, but it's about how little the loser team, the sad team, got in return for him. With the Luka thing, that was like, yo, not only did they move Luka, but they moved him for stuff that you would never agree to. But they did the same thing with Jaylen Brown just now, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I would tell other teams with lifetime players, I look at Jokic and the Nuggets, obviously Wemby in San Antonio, SGA in Oklahoma. I would just say, don't think it's crazy that the same thing will happen to you, especially since this is something that the NBA is having occur, and it is drawing a lot of traffic. When you think about corporations and what draws traffic, at the end of the day, they don't care if it's a good thing or a bad thing, just that you're paying attention. It could be something that's extremely sorrowful, but if you're paying attention, it draws ratings, it meets their bottom line. And I think that that's what they're finding is, if we do this every summer, if we snatch some flagship player off of a team and for dirt cheap for at least 2 weeks, we're going to have extreme traffic. And then that can propel, of course, extreme traffic to the games because, of course, you're going to want to see Philly versus Sixers. Of course, you want to see Dallas versus Lakers. And so if this works the way that I think it probably will work, they're going to want to see it happen again. they're going to duplicate the behavior, just like we often say. If something works, people are going to keep doing it. And as it pertains to that Luka Doncic shock and all trade, yeah, I feel like the NBA was duplicating that with this Jaylen Brown thing, hoping that it would be the exact same energy, exact same traffic, or more. So I think that's part of it. The Boston Celtics, their fan base is essentially being sacrificed for the sake of the ratings of the NBA. So that's really a thing. And then another thing that I think could be possible here, and I haven't heard this theory at all, it's just one that I concocted in my brain trying to wrap my mind around what it is I'm seeing in regards to the return. And this kind of negates the other two theories in a way. But just thought, the ownership group may have wanted Jaylen Brown moved, period. And Brad Stevens, with his great reputation for making good moves, may not have been on board with this, may not have wanted to move Jaylen Brown at all, despite ownership being adamant about him doing so. And he may have sabotaged this trade in protest of being pressured to do the action itself. And when you look at the return that the Boston Celtics brought back, everybody up and down the board, even if you agree that Clippers swap thing is a fantastic piece, asset to have, and I think most people who are knowledgeable about that pick have told us that pick is very valuable, you would still not think that it's worth a top 6 MVP in his prime. That's a nice return, and it's a return that you would love to have, but is it worth a top 6 MVP in his prime? A guy who has many accolades, including NBA championship and finals MVP, on his resume. Is it truly worth that guy at 30 years of age? And I think most people would say, nah, not if you're not attaching more to it than what it is they got, especially when you consider the contract that they got is a player that's arguably on an even more polarizing contract, who, though is one less year on his deal, is expected to do significantly less for his team than the guy who has 3 years on the deal. So for example, if you're going to say, okay, well, Paul George has 2 years left on the deal, if you look at the games that Paul George has played over the last several years, you would have to look at that as a lesser value asset on the court than Jaylen Brown, who's played a good number of games and has been successful leading his team, whether the number one option, Jason Tatum, was out there or not. You would have to think that you're getting more bang for your buck with the 3-year deal, bad contract on Jaylen Brown, if you see it that way, than you would on a 2-year deal for Paul George. So for me, it's like, especially at the same price, basically, it's like if I'm going to choose one, if it's about on-court production, clearly Jaylen Brown is the piece to have. Now, you can weigh that against the draft equity and maybe psych yourself into believing that there's some equal value, but I could argue that the Paul George contract should cost some draft equity to get rid of. And you want to weigh the bad versus the bad, you want to say they're equally bad contracts with 1 extra year, maybe you can psych yourself into saying that it balances out in regards to value. But you have to perceive Jaylen Brown's contract versus the player on the court as worth significantly less than what my perception is of of Jaylen Brown. You have to see Jaylen Brown significantly less than I do to be able to tell yourself that him and his contract on a 3-year deal is worth Paul George some 2 good picks and 2 second-round picks at 2 years. I don't see an equivalent there. Even if I'm to presume that is a really, really good pick. One of those 2 first-rounders is a really, really good pick. So for me, it's like when it comes to value, just strictly value, a good portion of that it comes with analytics, the presence of perception, universal agreement to perceive as it pertains to all the owners. And that can be really tricky and very manipulatable if you ask me. Because if owners are going to be in lockstep about lowballing somebody, then the presence of all in agreement would then manipulate the market itself. They can do that with anybody if they choose to. They can say that Wemby isn't worth anything, and if they all agree not to trade for Wemby, then suddenly Wemby's value is lost. So where does the power of the market actually lie? Does it lie with the overall agreement of the owners? And if that's the case, is that not manipulatable and something that should be checked? If you're a players association, this is the question you need to start asking yourself. If all the owners can come together and agree that a player is not worth anything, and suddenly they all realize it's not worth anything, how much power do you actually have? Or do you not need to comply with all of their intentions, whether it be on the court or off the court, to assure that they won't collectively come together and just push you out, regardless of how productive you are on the court, regardless of how you're perceived in the community that you play for, or on the court amongst your peers? All of these things, I would say the NBA need to be very, very careful, because their true colors are starting to show in a way that makes people wonder what else you're doing in agreement with one another that maybe we don't agree with as consumers. When you look at what Jaylen Brown is doing out here, I think it's very easy to say that we all perceive him as a very, very, very talented and productive basketball player. The media came together and said he was the sixth most productive basketball player on his team, sixth most valuable basketball player on his team just this past season. And you all came together and essentially said he's not worth that to us, and therefore he's not realized as worth that in the market. That is not quite fair, if that's what it is that's going on there. And when you look at the fact that if I'm to perceive that one of the best GMs in the league went around each and every organization that would be willing to trade for Jaylen Brown and didn't come up with a better offer than this, if I'm to take that at face value, that he didn't settle on a worse offer than provided, then that means all of y'all agreed that Jaylen Brown is worth less than the players on the court believe he is, than the media thinks he is, than the average fan like myself thinks he is, and then what he believes himself to be worth, than what his representation would believe he's worth. And players on the court, his peers thinks he's worth. Like, it becomes a conversation of, owners, I detect that you have too much power in an area so long as you collectively come together and agree that power should be realized amongst you in unison. That is an imbalance. That is a real imbalance, and it doesn't reflect what's actual on the basketball court, and it's manipulatable, and I don't like it. As a consumer of NBA basketball, I don't like it. I don't like that you had that much power together. I don't like that at all. Because y'all don't run around on those basketball courts. You're certainly not bringing down the value of your tickets enough to make that type of power realized in our lives. When you run the tickets up so expensive, and you run the TV prices up so expensive that all of us can't even watch our games, and you want to get on people for pirating these tickets, or rather pirating these TV deals, and shut down all these pirated processes for us to watch the games, but then behind the scenes you're manipulating stuff like this together. Nah, fam, nah, something ain't adding up. You want us to be on the up and up? You need to be on the up and up. Yeah. Savvy fans are starting to question these things. So, like, that's one theory that I have, is they blackballing this boy because they don't like the positions he's taking, because they don't like that he's the way that he is, however they perceive him. And look, this is a consistent thing that I'm seeing amongst many, because quite honestly, the way our country is moving right now, that's the dynamic between the government and the people. We don't agree with certain things, and these things are still happening. People amongst the government who are in power are agreeing with one another, and it's leaving us on the back end without power. This is just a reflective dynamic of what we're seeing in this league as it pertains to Jaylen Brown's perceived value. And people collectively coming together with a lot of power, manipulating the price tag on certain things, when it should be the basketball itself, the floor itself, and what that person produces on the floor itself that should determine a good portion of that value. A good portion, if not all, of that value. not him agreeing to align with ideologies that he doesn't agree with as a human being. That maybe a lot of us who are fans of him don't agree with either. And we champion him for taking the opposite positions that you take. Because those are just to us. The people who pay your bills, or at least we think we do. I tell you right now, I think Jaylen Brown has been a consummate pro on the court and has earned the right to be seen as a valuable basketball player. He should not have gone for a bad contract and two perceived pretty good, if not very good, picks. He's worth more than that in his prime. And if he would align with the things that people want him to align with off the court, that would be realized on the court. But at the end of the day, he's still expected to go out there on the court and produce, while people are constantly telling us that he's not valuable on the court. He's still expected to go out there every game and sweat, push, bleed, and lead. So y'all perceived games that y'all playing with his value does not take away from his responsibilities to still get on the floor and do the job, and then after the games address the public on y'all platforms, talk to y'all media and answer whatever questions you provide him. His responsibilities remain the same, so the perceived value should have a bit more balance as it pertains to what I'm detecting. That's how I feel. Shouldn't be a bunch of people agreeing to just collectively say, yo, this guy ain't worth nothing. Okay then he shouldn't be forced to play every game. He shouldn't be forced to talk to the media. He shouldn't have to come to your NBA Cares, off the court events. He shouldn't have to do half of that if you can devalue him without those things being the bulk of what it is that ultimately brings about that value. He should be able to, if he rolls an ankle, if he wants to take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, he should be able to do that without anybody coming in and saying, oh, you're doing wrong. No, he's not. Because if he says the wrong thing, like free Palestine, suddenly you're devaluing the hell out of him any damn way. This is an imbalance. And if the Players Association is not in cahoots with those who are providing this imbalance, then they need to be fighting to assure that that balance is found. That's their job. So that players have a bit more control over their perceived value, if possible. If such things are even possible, there should be a fight to assure that it remains within the control of the players on the court, and not so much perceived value being determined by a collection of owners who agree one way or another. So that's what I wanted to say. I think that this is getting tricky. And another thing that I think can be taken into account, it's another theory that I have, and this does not have anything to do with what we've been talking about. Let's get into a different subject, a different way of looking at things. I think that the idea of an NBA superstar on a very, very big contract may, amongst the owners, be considered to be a liability in general. Regardless of what the player's value is, or regardless how well the player plays or doesn't play, the sheer notion that they can roll an ankle and that value be just destroyed, the sheer nature that they could blow a knee out or retire early or, God forbid, pass away, the perceived notion of that risk could potentially be worked into the perceived value as well. That because we have invested $200 or $300 million into this person that is not immortal, that is subject to make poor decisions, that could find themselves in legal trouble, that could find themselves doing something that is detrimental to the team, the more that we invest into that, the more we realize that that is a risk that may be realized in the value of the player. We as fans definitely want superstars on our team, and we want them locked down and play for 20, 30 years, whatever, how long they can play. We want them to play forever. But these owners, they absorb the risk. So whether I have a player that's living up to that risk or not, the more the bigger the player, the bigger the star, the bigger the contract, the bigger the combination of star and contract, the bigger the risk when investing in that player. And if the collection of owners have come together and said, the sheer notion of that risk is worth less to me, then you can see what just happened with Luka and with Jaylen Brown potentially be what happens here. Now, that's a little tricky to me, because it's like, if a guy's worth more, then he's bringing more to you. So as long as he's doing that, the value should be on its face, him being worth more. But if the idea is the more I pour in, the increase the risk based on whether a guy is the 12th man or the first man, he could blow a knee injury and be out. If I'm pouring, let's say I pour $3 million in the 12th man, he blows his knee out for the season, never plays again, has to retire early. Not as much as a big risk as if Nikola Jokic, who I'm paying $300 million, blows his knee out and never plays again. Now it's a significantly greater risk. I think they may be looking at those scenarios as a means of devaluing the player when it's time to trade players. I think they're looking at it that way. I think that could be perceived value being just significantly less worthy of a strong return. If I'm to say, man, I bring the superstar to me, now I'll absorb the risk. And so me having to absorb the risk brings about more stress, more strain. If things lean into the low side or to the catastrophic side scenarios, suddenly I'm absorbing the worst that comes with that. Because of that, anytime one of these superstars get moved, I'm docking their value for that perceived catastrophic process being possible. I think that's what you may be looking at as well, ladies and gentlemen. And they just say, yo, superstars ain't worth as much, because I'm taking on the risk that makes it so that if things go completely wrong, it hurts more. Absolutely more. So that's what I think could be possible, man. Because you look at what Luka Doncic went for, you're like, how in the hell is this superstar going for this little bitty price tag? And then you look at Jaylen Brown, it's like, okay, this is a trend. Now I see another superstar being moved for this little bitty price tag. And then I look back and I say, okay, Giannis. Look at the perceived value of Giannis as it pertains to the rumored trade that was on the table for the Boston Celtics prior to this Jaylen Brown trade. They said they didn't want to bring in Giannis Antetokounmpo, one single body on fantastic contract, great MVP player, NBA champion, obviously somebody that we see amongst the fans as one of the best players in the game, and one of the best players maybe all time. But the Celtics said, no, we don't want Giannis Antetokounmpo, because now you're asking for too much when you ask for Jaylen Brown, of whom we see exactly what he's worth to them, and the pick equity that would have been thrown on top of Giannis. They said that it was too much value because now the Heat were also asking for two role players, young role players who were just drafted 2 years ago, Baylor Shireman and Hugo Gonzalez. Those two players are worth very little in the market today. Now, they have upside. You would expect if you bring them to your team, you get more out of them than the Celtics did. I can see where the Celtics, having those players, really believing in those guys, may not want to move them, but they should not, if everything is how we think it is, should have kept the Celtics from pulling the trigger on the Giannis trade that would have sent all that out to Miami. But if you take it to account what I just said in this last scenario, then you can see why the risk of bringing in Giannis may not have been worth as much to the Celtics, because he's one man on one contract worth so much that would eat up so much of their cap. And if things go wrong with him, suddenly that one person represents so many different problems that can come from him not being available to them. Now, I can argue that's just a poor decision, right? Not taking Giannis and then proceeding to turn Jaylen Brown into Paul George and a couple picks. obviously, if you look back on it, hindsight would make all of us think that they should have taken Giannis. But if they perceive that scenario where the superstar brings the greater risk, bringing lesser value, kind of makes sense that they didn't want to give up what we should now think was a very worthy package for Giannis. So I think that Giannis's trade kind of lends itself to just where the NBA may believe superstar contracts are at as it pertains to how valuable they perceive superstar contracts in general, regardless of who the body is attached to it. But I think that any superstar, if they're traded today, could potentially go for not so much. Not so much. You look at the trade that the Lakers made to get Walker Kessler, and it costs, in terms of pick equity and perceived value, more to get Walker Kessler here, and he was a restricted free agent. In what world does Walker Kessler return as a restricted free agent usurp the trading of Jaylen Brown's contract? Like, it makes sense when you insert the scenario I just said, when you think of the perceived risk of Walker Kessler for the Lakers is significantly less than the perceived risk of Giannis Antetokounmpo or Jaylen Brown for the Celtics, based on Walker Kessler being our number 3 option in this conversation, Walker Kessler being on a contract that we can sign him to, that we control, that we negotiate with him, in theory. Although I think the sign and trade would make it so that he negotiated with Utah. Either way, it was a favorable contract with us, the Lakers in this case. And because the perceived risk is less, you can see where maybe they would be more willing to provide more equity in its stead toward the Utah Jazz. Just a theory, but one that lines up, I think. So yeah, I hope I articulated myself well. I've been giving a lot of thought to this, as you guys can clearly see. And then try to wrap your mind around why Jaylen Brown went for so little, why Luka Doncic went for so little, why Hugo Gonzalez and Baylor Scheinman held up the Giannis to Boston trade. This is what I came up with. This is the best I could do. This is what I think is probably going on here, man. And I would just tell people, man, we may never really know what's going on with these trades. I think you might have a couple of these scenarios being what's going on, and not just one of them, but like several in unison working with one another to make all of this happen. And the NBA, at the end of the day, is a business that's looking to meet its bottom line. There are new owners in place now that have other agendas going on off the court outside of this business that may not align with the common man, the common humanitarian, the common decent human beings, ethics and morals. And that's another thing that I think is very true at this point. Some of the big money that's coming in, these people make their big money doing evil stuff. I'm just telling you, I'm learning about some of these owners, and what made them as wealthy as they are is some of the worst stuff that we ultimately fighting and protesting against today. That's who the NBA has allowed to buy these teams, is some really, really awful human beings and awful businesses. And selfish, anti-human businesses kind of control some of your basketball teams and football teams and baseball teams now, because they had the money to throw at it from all the wealth that they gained from all the evil stuff they've been doing. This is a real thing, ladies and gentlemen. This is a real thing. And I would tell those businesses, you beware of what you're doing with these basketball teams and these football teams, because what it will do is have people asking the right questions that gets to the crux of certain topics that otherwise they wouldn't look toward. Y'all shining the light on certain things that people aren't even paying attention to. Average American is just doing whatever they're supposed to do to meet their pastimes. When you do stuff like this, they start asking why, and they start going down rabbit holes. They start finding out things that you don't want us paying attention to. I know, as someone who pays attention to a lot of this stuff, you don't want us paying attention to. It's why you want to silence voices like Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brown. It's to keep from having light shined on these things so that people won't boycott you. Well, when you do stuff like this, it sends them in the direction from which to look at those things. And y'all need to understand this, because that's exactly what you're doing. It's a organic awakening to a lot of the nonsense that's going on above our heads as common people. Some of our pastimes are being directly affected by these same entities that are doing these evil things that otherwise we would be uprising against if we knew anything about. BDF 44, I thank you all for watching. I'm out.